Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be crafting with you today. We are going to be making our own little beaded tree ornaments. And so we're going to learn how to make these using foam sheets and beading, and even a little bit of sewing with puncturing the foam sheets so that they all are beaded on there. I'm going to go through all of our supplies we're going to be using, and then we'll get started. So firstly, we are using foam sheets. So I have some different colors of foam sheets here. And you can use any color that you might want to use. You don't have to do a traditional like red and green holiday color palette. You can do any color that you might want. You could use paper for this project as well if you don't have foam sheets. It just might be a little bit easier to tear when you stitch through it. So I would just definitely recommend doing that very carefully if you're going to use paper. But the foam sheets work really well and are easy to push our needles through, which we'll be using our Creatology plastic needles. And these little plastic needles are safe for all ages. And they also have quite a large hole or eye in the needle. So it makes it really easy to use yarn or any sort of thread that you might want to use. And with that, we are going to be using our Creatology Friendship Bracelet kit. I'm using some embroidery thread from these kits, but any embroidery thread or sewing thread, or again, even like a thin yarn would work as well. And then we're going to be using beads. So I have this whole big bead kit here, but also some fun little star beads. So any bead kit that you might want to use, any colors that you are interested in will be fine. Another option you could use is sequins. So I have all these fun Creatology sequins. You could definitely use those instead of beads if you wanted to. And then we are going to use a marker, scissors, liquid glue, and then we are going to be using our marker to draw 2 different size circles to create the base of our foam. I think a great little trick is to have 2 different size glasses. So I have one that's a little bit smaller and one's a little bit larger. And so you can trace these glasses and make your circles that way. Or you can use any sort of bowl, anything like that works really well. Or you can just freehand draw your own circles. So I think that's all the supplies we're going to be using. I'm going to flip my camera around so you guys can see my hands, and we will get started. And as Kina said, if you have any questions as we get started, please don't hesitate to ask. You can put anything in the Q&A and we can answer those questions for you, whether it is ideas for different materials. If you don't have something that we've talked about that isn't in the list, let me know. All right. So to start our little ornaments, the first thing we're going to do is to trace our circles or draw circles to create the foam base. And again, you can use any color combos that you might want. I think it's kind of fun since we're using 2 different size circles that we have a smaller one that all the beading will go on, and then a larger one that creates a little frame, but it also hides all of the stitching on the back. So that's a fun little detail that we'll add that after we do our stitching, so that all the messy part and the knots that we're going to create on the back will disappear and your ornament looks finished on both sides. So drawing 2 different size circles is ideal. So to start, I'm going to take my smaller of my glasses. You can see I kind of have these 2 different size glasses, just like drinking glasses from my kitchen. And a quick way to know if one is going to be smaller than the other, if you're not sure, if you can fit one inside of the other, then you're going to then it will definitely have enough to create a frame. So I'm going to take my smaller glass first, and I'm going to place it on top of my foam, and then with my marker, I'm going to trace right along the edge of the drinking glass. And then depending on what color combo you want to do, I'm going to take another lighter shade of green foam, and I'm going to trace my larger glass. And so I'm going to flip this over, lay it on top of my foam, and trace it. And again, you can definitely just draw your own circles or you can draw a completely different shape. It doesn't have to be a circle. If you want to draw the shape of a Christmas tree or a snowman or a square, there's no wrong ornament shape, so you could do any size or any shape that you want. So you can see my two circles next to each other, two different sizes. So when we cut these out, this one will be smaller to fit on top of this one, and we'll be able to have a little frame around it. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and cut these out. And I always like to kind of cut away from whatever extra material and just doesn't get in the way of your scissors and makes your cutting a little bit easier. And then I'm just going to cut right along the black line that I drew. And you can use a marker, or you might have used a pencil. A pencil does show up well on the foam sheets, just doesn't show up quite as well on camera. So opt for a black marker. So there's my first little circle. Do the same thing on our second one. And I try to cut just kind of like right on the inside edge of my trace line. And that way it cuts away the black line. So you don't have any of that as part of your finished ornament. I'm just cutting slowly. As you can see, as I cut my scissors, I'm never actually closing the tip of my scissors. I'm opening them back up and then putting the foam as far into the mouth closest to the handle of my scissors, and then taking another bite with my scissors. And the key with nice smooth edges is that sometimes when you cut down with the tip of your scissors, it can actually create little tiny splits, and that can sometimes create little jagged edges. So if you cut slowly and open your scissors before you clomp all the way down, then you're going to create a nice smooth line. Okay, so now we can see we've got these two circles here. One a little bit smaller so that it can fit inside. And the smaller one is going to be the one that we are going to be beading on. And to do that, we're going to be using embroidery thread and our plastic needle. And get a different color needle. I feel like this yellow show up quite as much. So with these plastic needles, you can see that the tip on them is sharp enough to puncture the foam or paper. Even most felts, it could probably go through pretty easily, but it's not so sharp that it's going to actually prick your finger. And then the hole at the top of your needle was called the eye of the needle. And that's where we're going to pull our thread through. And it's a little bit larger, which makes it much easier to practice threading a needle. Okay, so we're going to create multiple layers. You can see here in our little example here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rows of our little tree, and then a little star topper that's actually glued on rather than beaded on or sewn on. And we've got some little color patterns and different things, but you can do any sort of combination that you want to, of course. And so what's great on here is we're going to start with threading our needle. So I'm going to pull a couple of feet of string off of my whole little bundle of thread here. And then we're going to tie a knot on one side. So we're just going to tie a simple knot. So we're going to overlap our string and then pull that little tail underneath and through the hole. We're going to do that again to make a thicker knot. So again, we're going to create a little circle here. And then you're going to take this tail, go underneath and through the circle you just made, and then line up your knot to create a double knot. And then I'm going to do that one more time to make that a nice chunky little knot so that it doesn't go through our foam. And then with the other end, so we've got our knot on one side. On the other end of the thread that we cut off, we can easily push this right through the eye of the needle and just pull it through. So when your needle is all ready to sew, should look something like this. So I have my thread through the eye of my needle here. And I've pulled it down a little bit just so that it is not so close to the eye that it can slip out easily. And then on the other end, I have a little knot. I'm going to just trim off that tail a little bit. And then we're going to create our little puncture marks so that we can line up our tree nicely. So you can do a little pin if you want to, or a pencil to kind of draw out your shape. We're going to puncture it from the back, so you can flip this over, you won't see it. So I'm going to do a little triangle shape going up. You can also draw a triangle on here if you want to. Again, we're going to be able to flip this over so you won't see that. And again, all your little knots, anything like that will be hidden on the back, and this will cover up any messiness or marks, so you don't have to worry about making marks on this side. And this is to create a little triangle tree shape, like in our little sample here. But once you kind of get the hang of it, you can make any shape that you might want. Okay, so since this is the back of my ornament, again, we're going to cover this up. I'm going to puncture, taking my plastic needle through the back. So I'm going to go from where I just drew my little dots. I'm going to push my needle through and pull that. And just pull it tight enough so that my knot goes right to the back. And then I'm going to puncture the other side, but I'm not going to pull my needle through. I'm going to pull it out, just so I'm just creating a puncture so that I know where I'm going to put my needle. And you can do that on all your little dots. So I'm just barely pushing my needle through and then pulling it back out to create a little template of where I want to push my needle through. And now where all those little dots are, I just push my needle through. So now when I flip this over from the front, I can see all my little dots, little like template holes of where my needle is going to go in and out of. So now we can actually start beading, which is the fun part, that you can mix and match any sort of colors or styles. I like these fun little iridescent star beads are fun too. And again, I'm using this Creatology friendship bracelet kit. So all of these beads, other than the stars, come in here, which is really fun. You get a lot of different options, but any beads will work. And if we're using something like these larger plastic beads, you can see the hole here is big enough that our needle will fit through it easily. But some of these smaller beads, like these little ones that have a tiny little hole, that we actually will take the needle off and just push the end of the thread through on its own. And a little trick that if you aren't using a needle or if you have really small beads like these, you can wet the end of your thread and that will kind of pull all of the little loose threads back together. So you can wet the tips of your fingers and just kind of pull it together and it will make it nice and easy to push through. Okay, so we grab some beads here. Again, for these larger ones, they can easily go right through. My needle can go right through. And as you are beading, I like to kind of lay it in place, and that will give you an idea of how many beads will fit before you get to your next hole. I mean, for something small like these little gold ones, see the hole is really tiny. So I'm going to take my needle off of my thread. And then I'm going to push my thread into the bead instead. See, I got one little thread here that didn't want to go through. I'm just going to trim my into my thread and then try again here. Push. You want to get through all those little threads, all those little fibers through, and then pull it through. So on here, I can kind of see an idea of I have 3 of these larger beads and 1 smaller bead. I can probably fit 3 more of these on the other side. So I'm going to thread my needle again and then bead 3 more of these larger plastic beads. It's kind of fun with beading. There is a lot of different ways to do it if you want to make patterns. Like I sort of am here, but you can also just mix and match all of them and it will look really cute and like a fun little colorful tree. So you can see here as I have my beads pulled pretty tight here, I can see that I'm just out of room. And so I can then take my needle and go back through the hole that I made on the other side here and pull that through. And your first row is attached. And now from this point, you're going to go into the next row and continue beading each row. So I'm going to flip this over. I'm kind of holding this in place just so it keeps it tight. I'm going to go through the back. So the back of your tree should start to look like this. And then you can start your next row of beading here. Again, some of these that are going to be too small for my needle, I'm just going to pull my needle off. And then you can push it right through the bead instead. Mixing and matching different colors. So I have pink and red and white, kind of going with that color story. Start to see those all lining up there. And these are much smaller beads than the larger plastic ones. And so it's going to take quite a few more to fill in the space. And anytime if you start to feel like you've got some crazy little fibers, one that doesn't want to stay in line, just trim off a little bit of the end of your thread. And that will give you a nice clean edge to work with. And so if you want to create a pattern, which I am doing here, so I started with a pink, then a white, and then a red of these little seed beads. So I'm going to do that same pattern over and over to fill in the whole space. So I have a pink, a white, a red, and then I'm going to start that again with another pink, and then another white, and then another red. You can see that little pattern starting. I'm digging through all these colors as we go to find the color that I want. It takes a little bit of practice and patience to get the thread through the end of these, through the end of the thread through your bead. String all these on. Again, I'm just kind of pulling them fairly tight to see how many can fit. You also don't have to fill it up from hole to hole. If you want it to be a little bit looser, you could spread out your beads and then stitch it back through. That's totally up to you and how many beads you want. I can do another couple more on here. I like to just kind of twist the end of the thread between your fingers, and that kind of straightens out all those individual little fibers as well. Because embroidery thread, even though we call it a thread, it's actually made up of multiple individual smaller threads. Most of them have 6 individual little tiny threads, so that's what you have to kind of get to all line up together. Turn that off again. Get this through these tiny little beads. We're using our plastic needles that have the larger eye, or we're just hand threading them like I am on this row. If you love beading, there are tiny little needles you can use as well, but most of them are pretty sharp, so it's definitely something you want to craft with an adult. Okay, so now I've kind of filled in good portion of this little row. You can see here where my next hole is. So I'm going to thread my needle again. And I'm going to pull my needle through the next hole. And pull that tight. So I'm holding it tight from the back. And then I'm going to go to the next row up, push my needle through the back, and we'll bring it up to the front. And so there you have your first 2 rows all beaded on. And then we're going to continue beading a few more. So let me take some of these larger ones. I'm kind of flipping back and forth between large and small beads. It's kind of fun to give your ornament lots of different dimensions and depths. It just makes it a little more interest. You can see there, just doing 3 of those large beads. As we get to the top of our tree, it creates that triangle, which means each row is going to get smaller and smaller. I'm going to go back through my hole on the other side of that line. Pull that tight. And again, I'm holding it pretty tight, not so tight that I'm putting pressure on the other holes to tear my foam, but just tight enough that it keeps these all in line. And hold it with one hand and then go to the next row. I'm going to push my needle through the next hole above it. And then you're ready to do your next row. I did this little gold bead down in the bottom, so I'm going to do some more of these little gold beads. Again, they're pretty small, so I took my needle off. And then we're going to just hand thread these on. Oh, and then I made this a little bit too big. As you can see, when I pull this tight, my bead is going past my next hole, which if I did that, you could, but it will kind of droop down because it won't all fit. So if I want to pull it tight, like the other ones, I'm just going to pull this last bead off and put my needle back on my thread and then push it down to the back. And again, I'm pulling this just tight enough to hold it straight and go through the next row. Pull it up. And with that, you can see we can only fit 2 of these smaller beads at the bottom, but this bottom, the row below it. So this top row probably only be able to fit like 1 bead. Let's see here. Or maybe we can do a couple of these little tiny beads to finish it out. So again, when we're building patterns, it's fun to have repetition in a pattern. So not only am I repeating colors in a pattern, but repeating the materials as well. So we've got our little gold bead down here. We repeated gold beads up here. We have these thin little seed style beads down here. So we're going to repeat those up there. We probably only fit a couple of them in that space. I think that those are going to fit perfectly right at the top. So we're going to thread our needle again and do the same thing for like we did for each one to finish out the row, pull it through the back. And then we're going to tie this on the back. And you can tie another knot here, or a really easy way is to kind of do a little stitch knot. So I'm going to pull my needle underneath this threaded little stitch, pull it through, and then loop it around to go through one more time. And then in this circle that we made, I'm going to pull my needle through that circle and then pull that tight. It's kind of just looped through there. You can do that a couple of times. An easy little stitch just pulls it tight. And then again, we're going to glue this down so you won't see any of this. And I'm going to cut that loose. If you're having any trouble with your knots on the back, another quick little hack you could do, instead of tying knots, you could just take a piece of Scotch tape and tape it to the back, or a glue dot, and that will secure it so it doesn't fall out the front. Okay, so then we're going to glue this on to our larger circle. And I'm just using my Elmer's white craft glue. You could also use glue dots or even hot glue if you're crafting with an adult. This will take a little bit longer to dry, of course, than like a glue dot might, but I do think that it probably is more secure. It will last for numerous holiday seasons. So you can bring it out every year. So I'm just going to lay this right on top. Kind of smush it around to center it. And then you can see all of the knots and the stitches and the holes that we made is all hidden behind. So now your ornament looks finished from both sides. Okay, so we've got 2 steps left. We're going to add our little hanger at the top using more embroidery thread, as well as add a little star to the top of our tree. Those are both optional. You could definitely skip this if you didn't want to make it into an ornament. This would be a really cute gift or a little card. You could write a cute note on the back of it instead. But to turn it into an ornament, we're going to create a little puncture hole using our plastic needle again. But instead of the dark green, I'm going to go through the light green, kind of right at the top of my tree. Just create a small hole at the top. I'm going to thread my needle. And then I'm going to pull my needle through, but I'm not tying a hole or tying a knot on either end of my thread. I'm just pulling it through so then we have thread on either side. You can tie a little knot at the top here, or you can add a little bead, which I think is a fun little addition if you want to. So if you wanted to do something like that, you could take a bead through both pieces of thread. And then I'm just going to create a couple of inches, and then I'm going to tie a knot using both of these. I'm going to create a little circle overlapping, pull my threads through the circle, and then pull tight to make a knot. And I'm going to trim off the extra. And so there you have a way for this to hang directly on your tree, or as a gift topper if you wanted to add this to a gift would be really cute. And then lastly, I'm going to add a little bit of glue right at the top. I'm going to take one of these iridescent star beads and add it right to the top of our little beaded tree. And there's your finished beaded ornament. I enjoyed crafting with all of you guys today. We went through all the steps of making our ornaments. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. And I hope that you're adorning all of your trees and all of your gifts with cute beaded ornaments this holiday season. Thanks so much for crafting with me and with Michael. See you soon.